Hey guys, it's Ellie. Welcome back to Bite-Sized Book of Mormon. I'm glad you're here. So if you've never been here before, this is just a podcast where I read through one chapter of the Book of Mormon at a time, and I give a little bit of commentary, a little bit of insight, a little bit of jokes, maybe, who knows? And yeah, it's a good time, so you should stick around. So if you remember last episode, we read 1 Nephi chapter 18, which is a really, really cool story about Nephi finishing building the boat that God told him to make in the chapter before that. And then Nephi and his family getting on the boat, and on the boat ride, during their travels to the Promised Land, Laman and Lemuel go rogue, as they do, and they tied up Nephi to a post, and as soon as they tied up Nephi, the Liahona stopped telling them where to go, and there was a huge storm that kicked up, and after 4 days of almost dying in this storm, Laman and Lemuel finally let Nephi go, and as soon as they let him go, everything is calmed after he prays to God. It's written at least as being very, very sudden. So yeah, it was a really cool chapter. I had a lot of interpretations about what you could learn from the different aspects of the story. It's an endlessly interpretable story. It's really, really cool. It has some really interesting principles in there that you can really apply to your life. So go ahead and listen to the episode if you want to hear a little bit of my thoughts about that. But I think without further ado, we move on to 1 Nephi chapter 19. And it came to pass that the Lord commanded me, wherefore I did make plates of ore, that I might engraven upon them the record of my people. And upon the plates which I made, I did engraven the record of my father, and also our journeyings in the wilderness, and the prophecies of my father, and also many of mine own prophecies have I engraven upon them. So this is where Nephi makes his record. Up until this point, Nephi has been writing about things that happened to him when he was younger. All the chapters before this, he wasn't writing those records live, as you might say. He wrote them kind of in retrospect, which it's really cool that he was able to keep as much detail as he did, despite some of them happening 20 to 30 years ago. So in the chapter summary, it says that this chapter happened about 588 to 570 BC, which means it has been about 22 to 30 years since Nephi and his family have left Jerusalem. So some of these events happened decades ago for Nephi, but it's very interesting if you think about it. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the books in the New Testament, the Gospels that have the life of Jesus in them, weren't written until decades after Jesus' death. You know, it's not a novel thing in Scripture for accounts of events to be written decades after the fact. And like I said, I think it's cool that Nephi can retain so much detail despite it happening so long ago. And I knew not at the time when I made them that I should be commanded of the Lord to make these plates, wherefore the record of my father and the genealogy of his fathers and the more part of all our proceedings in the wilderness are engraven upon those first plates of which I have spoken, wherefore the things which transpired before I made these plates are of a truth more particularly made mention upon the first plates. And after I had made these plates by way of commandment, I, Nephi, received a commandment that the ministry and the prophecies, the more plain and precious parts of them, should be written upon these plates, and that the things which were written should be kept for the instruction of my people who should possess the land, and also for otherwise purposes, which purposes are known unto the Lord. Wherefore I, Nephi, did make a record upon the other plates, which gives an account, or which gives a greater account, of the wars and contentions and destructions of my people. And this have I done, and commanded my people that they should do after I was gone, that these plates should be handed down from one generation to another, or from one prophet to another, until further commandments of the Lord. So it's actually really cool to me to see how these records are handed down through the generations. There's one book, I think it's in Omni, where hundreds of years pass in the span of 10 or 15 verses, because essentially every other verse is just hey, my name's such and such, nothing much happened, I'm gonna give these records to my son now, goodbye. And then that happens 4 or 5 times in a row. So it's kind of really interesting to see how these records were passed down throughout the generations. Some people wrote in them, some people, as I mentioned, didn't write in them that much, but they still kind of left Shiblon was here sort of thing. I don't know if Shiblon was one of the ones that had them, but could have been. There is a Shiblon in the Book of Mormon. But yeah, no, so I just think it's cool, the practical part of having a stack of metal plates that are added to for 1,000 years. These records started, like I said, 600 BC to around a bit after 400 AD, which equalizes to 1,000 years. These records were maintained for that long. And it's really cool to see how it's handed down and by whom to whom. Sometimes it is father to son, sometimes it is to the prophet, sometimes it's to the king. It's very, very cool. And an account of my making these plates shall be given hereafter. And then, behold, I proceed according to that which I have spoken, and this I do, that the more sacred things may be kept for the knowledge of my people. Nevertheless, I do not write anything upon plates, save it be that I think it be sacred. And now, if I do err, even did they err of old, not that I would excuse myself because of other men, but because of the weakness which is in me, according to the flesh I would excuse myself. For the things which some men esteem to be of great worth, both to the body and soul, others set at naught and trample under their feet. Yea, even the very God of Israel do men trample under their feet. I say trample under their feet, but I would speak in other words. They set him at naught, and hearken not to the voice of his counsels. And behold, he cometh, according to the words of the angel, in 600 years from the time my father left Jerusalem. And the world, because of their iniquity, shall judge him to be a thing of naught, wherefore they scourge him, and he suffereth it. And they smite him, and he suffereth it. Yea, they spit upon him, and he suffereth it, because of his loving kindness and his long-suffering towards the children of men. And the God of our fathers, who were led out of Egypt, out of bondage, and also were preserved in the wilderness by him, yea, the God of Abraham and Isaac and the God of Jacob, yieldeth himself, according to the words of the angel, as a man, into the hands of wicked men, to be lifted up according to the words of Zenock, and to be crucified according to the words of Neum, and to be buried in a sepulchre according to the words of Zenos, which he spake concerning the 3 days of darkness, which should be a sign given of his death unto those who should inhabit the isles of the sea, more especially given unto those who are of the house of Israel. So this verse references 3 prophets that we do not know about anymore. Like we have Zenock, we have Neum, and we have Zenos, which means that Nephi and his family had scripture that has been completely lost to our modern era. That's so cool. And actually, I'm pretty sure it's in Jacob, where there's a very long chapter where Jacob basically quotes a long allegory that Zenos gave of the olive tree. And it's super cool to read words of prophets that we no longer remember existed. Like this is like lost media that's like being retrieved almost in like a different form. That's just so cool. Like this is a chapter full of like what I think is really interesting meta stuff. I don't know. I just think it's so cool that they had prophets that we no longer know about. Like, that's something you don't really think about. Like, oh, we think the Bible is like the one true perfect record of the gospel, but there's so much that we no longer have. And it's so interesting to think about that sometimes. Like, there's so much that was lost. Like, apparently Zenock talked about the crucifixion, and Neum talked about the sepulchre, and Zenos talked about 3 days of darkness. Like, these are very specific prophecies that we no longer have. For thus saith the prophet, the Lord God shall surely visit all the house of Israel at that day, some with his voice, because of their righteousness, unto their great joy and salvation, and others with the thunderings and lightnings of his power, by tempest, by fire, and by smoke, and by vapor of darkness, and by the opening of the earth, and by mountains which shall be carried up. And all these things must surely come, saith the prophet Zenos, and the rocks of the earth must rend, and because of the groanings of the earth, many of the kings of the isles of the sea shall be wrought upon by the Spirit of God to exclaim, the God of nature suffers. I really like that line. The God of nature suffers. Something really interesting that I heard at one point, actually from my mother, she mentioned at one point how, like, why do the natural laws and the laws of God need to be different? Like, a lot of people think that if you're a Christian, you can't believe in evolution because, obviously, in Genesis, they say that God created the world. But in my view, why not? Why can't evolution have happened? Why can't evolution have been facilitated by Jesus, who helped create the world? Why couldn't that have happened? I see no reason. And so I think it's really cool how they use the word here, the God of nature. Like, sometimes we forget that God created nature. Sometimes we focus on how God is the father of our souls, which obviously he is, but sometimes we forget that he created everything. And as for those who are at Jerusalem, saith the prophet, they shall be scourged by all people, because they crucify the God of Israel, and turn their hearts aside, rejecting signs and wonders, and the power and glory of the God of Israel. And because they turn their hearts aside, saith the prophet, and have despised the Holy One of Israel, they shall wander in the flesh, and perish, and become a hiss and a byword, and be hated among all nations. Nevertheless, when that day cometh, saith the prophet, that they no more turn aside their hearts against the Holy One of Israel, then will he remember the covenants which he made to their fathers. Yea, then will he remember the isles of the sea, yea, and all the people who are of the house of Israel will I gather in, saith the Lord, according to the words of the prophet Zenos, from the 4 quarters of the earth. Yea, and all the earth shall see the salvation of the Lord, saith the prophet. Every nation, kindred, tongue, and people shall be blessed. And I, Nephi, have written these things unto my people, that perhaps I might persuade them, that they would remember the Lord their Redeemer. Wherefore I speak unto all the house of Israel, if it so be that they should obtain these things. For behold, I have workings in the Spirit, which doth weary me, even that all my joints are weak, for those who are at Jerusalem. For had not the Lord been merciful to show unto me concerning them, even as he had prophets of old, I should have perished also. And he surely did show unto the prophets of old all things concerning them, And also he did show unto many concerning us, wherefore it must needs be that we know concerning them, for they are written upon the plates of brass. Now it came to pass that I, Nephi, did teach my brethren these things, and it came to pass that I did read many things unto them, which were engraven upon the plates of brass, that they might know concerning the things of the Lord in other lands, among people of old. And I did read many things unto them, which were written in the book of Moses, but that I might more fully persuade them to believe in the Lord their Redeemer, I did read unto them that which was written by the prophet Isaiah, for I did liken all scriptures unto us, that it might be for our profit and learning. I've said this 1,000 times, but I think it's cool how Nephi applies the scriptures to himself, and he makes it such a large part of his preaching. Wherefore I spake unto them, saying, Hear ye the words of the prophet, ye who are a remnant of the house of Israel, a branch who have been broken off. Hear ye the words of the prophet, which were written unto all the house of Israel, and liken them unto yourselves, that ye may have hope as well as your brethren of whom ye have been broken off. For after this manner has the prophet written. It's so cool how Nephi is like, okay, I'm making these records, and I'm writing everything that's happening up to this point, but I'm also going to put in the things of God, and the things of ministry and preaching, and the things that I find sacred into this record. And then he puts into this record things that he finds sacred. He talks about the gathering of Israel. He talks about the coming of Jesus Christ and his death and all the signs of his death. And like everything. Like he does kind of like an overview of the future a little bit. Like he talks about when Jesus is going to come and the signs of his death and who he's going to show up to. Not specifically who, but he does say he will show up to several people in different ways. I don't know. I think it's like a really cool kind of index of like what's going to happen in the Book of Mormon. Like I said, all this is spoilers technically because Jesus does come later in the Book of Mormon near the end. And I'm so excited to read that stuff with you guys. But I think it's really cool how powerful of a prophet Nephi is and how he finds all of this stuff to be very, very important, enough that he will scratch it into metal for our benefit. So my standout verse for this chapter is going to be verse 18, which reads, And I, Nephi, have written these things unto my people, that perhaps I might persuade them that they would remember the Lord their Redeemer. And that's really one of the few mission statements of the Book of Mormon as a whole. It is to remind us the power of the Lord our Redeemer. And also that we might remember and read about what these people went through so that we can learn from their mistakes. And in the Book of Mormon somewhere, I think it's later on, I'm not sure, the writer who is writing the book we're reading just says, I'm writing this so that you can learn to be better than we are. And I really like that. And that's really like how we should be reading the Book of Mormon, with the perspective of what do these people do right, what do these people do wrong, and what can I learn from that? Like I mentioned, I think in last episode, we can learn a lot from Laman and Lemuel and from Nephi. Like we learn what not to do from Laman and Lemuel, and we learn what to do from Nephi. And so everything in the Book of Mormon is valuable, and everything in the Book of Mormon is intended to remember the Lord our Redeemer. And that's really what this whole chapter is about. So I think that's going to be the episode for today. Thank you so much for listening. As always, there are those links in the show notes. If you don't have your own copy of the Book of Mormon and you'd like to read along, which I highly suggest, there is a link to get access to a free web version of the Book of Mormon or 2 different apps that also have a free version of the Book of Mormon on them. And you should. That's what I have to say about that. There's another link down there that just says, let me know what you learned. It's where you can give me feedback, whether it be about the podcast itself or about a little bit more insight that you had that you wanted to share with me that you might think I find neat, which that is actually a trick. I find everything to be neat. So tell me all of it. Tell me all of your thoughts. I'm very interested. So again, thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you later. Bye.